Welcome to the new For Purpose CEO Podcast.
I'm Michelle.
I am Danielle, and we are here to talk about being a CEO in the for-purpose sector. Each episode, we will talk about issues not-for-profit and for-purpose CEOs need to manage based on our 30-plus years of experience. It will be an honest discussion of the highs and the lows, helping you tackle the unique challenges of running a NFP.
Leading can be challenging and sometimes lonely. We get it. Join us and our guests weekly for an honest discussion about running a for-purpose organisation. We will be sharing practical tips, shared experiences and real-world stories to help you tackle the unique challenges of running a for-purpose organisation.
Today we have a guest and we are talking with Alex Green, who is the CEO of Arthritis New South Wales and Queensland. And Alex has been the CEO of Arthritis New South Wales for about 5 years, and then about 3 years ago became the CEO of Arthritis Queensland and led these two organisations to merge to become the Arthritis Movement. So surprise, surprise, today we're actually going to talk about mergers and how you as a CEO lead them, be involved in them, manage them, survive them, basically everything to do with merging two entities. Alex has got a fairly interesting background. He's spent 10 years fundraising at different organisations such as Guide Dogs before moving into CEO roles, including at Outward Bound Australia and the Arthritis New South Wales Queensland movement ever since. Outside of work, he is a football coach and he is a director at the wonderfully cute Story Dogs, which we encourage you to look up. So, mergers. Is this a word that now strikes fear in your heart, Alex? Have you survived it?
No, mergers don't strike fear into my heart at all. Having been through a couple, they are rarely straightforward, but they can be so empowering. And I think there's going to be an increased need for leaders to be comfortable with the idea of talking about mergers and be capable of steering their organisation through them. So no, I've looked back on the last few years as a really rewarding piece of work.
I think that's a good point. You're saying leaders needing to be comfortable about mergers. It takes a little bit of a courage, doesn't it, to consider the future of the organisation and a merger actually being an option. So what was the driving force behind the New South Wales-Queensland merge?
The merge that led to the Arthritis Movement was one from both organisations were in a good position, but recognised that they weren't delivering on their vision at the sort of scale they could. And only through different ways of operating could they really change their paradigm. And one of those ways was to look at collaboration and then ultimately merging with one of their neighbours. So that merger came not from a position of unsustainability or any financial issue, but actually one of better delivering on a vision.
That's actually really interesting because if you look around the for-purpose sector generally, there's a lot of mergers and there's a lot of articles being written at the moment around the unsustainability of a number of organisations across the sector. And so we are hearing a lot of conversations around the need to actually get a better balance sheet. So people are merging almost for sustainability reasons. So it's fantastic that this was not that case because that's quite a hard position to be in. And I guess one of the things that I was looking at when I was kind of thinking about this podcast was it is really about a for-purpose organisation. It's about your impact. So you'd really hope that a merger would increase your impact collectively, I guess.
Yeah, often the idea of merging is tied up with failure. And I really don't think that's the case. For me, failure is when leaders of an organisation allow it to do no good, or even worse, to trade insolvent and for the organisation to fail. But to merge requires a certain level of ambition and vision, the ability to look forward 6-12 months if your organisation may not be financially sustainable, or the idea to look beyond your own paradigm if you see there's potential to do better on delivering your mission.
It's a good point you made around people perceive mergers to be an indicator of a failure of an organisation. But apart from it being about impact, a merger can also bring capability into organisations that it would otherwise not be able to gain unless there was a merger. It just indicates that there's more than one reason or one compelling reason to actually merge several organisations.
There's a great cliche that a good merger is 1 + 1 = 3. And a merger can achieve a number of outcomes. It can create a sustainable model where small and independent organizations might struggle on their own. But also, if you can combine the best resources of 2 or more organizations coming together, that might be culture, might be skill set, might be geographic coverage, might be a range of services, a merged entity can be greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. And I guess some of those decisions and thinking are going to be taking place in the boardroom. And I imagine that as a CEO, you're brought in, you'll probably be doing a lot of work. So how early were you as the CEO brought in, or what was the kind of line where you went, oh, okay, we're actually going to talk merger, or actually we're looking at options? Like you in the CEO role, how did you kind of get involved and then stay involved? What was your role in it?
Okay, a couple of things. So Arthritis New South Wales, which is the organisation I started as CEO of in 2020, provided essentially the same suite of services as its neighbours around the rest of the country in a federated model. One of the benefits of COVID was at times it allowed you to look up and out at what others were doing and think differently about the organisation. So it quickly became apparent that New South Wales and Queensland had very well-aligned cultures, service offerings, etc. And so the CEO of Arthritis Queensland and I said, let's just find ways that we could do better together. So we started to collaborate on some campaigns and some service delivery models. We then hired a shared staff member, and suddenly the two organisations were going, okay, whilst we might be on other sides of, in our case, the state border, we're essentially doing the same work, and there are absolutely big benefits to be gained through collaboration. So our experience of moving to merger was actually built upon a couple of years of collaboration where we saw the benefits, financial benefits, cultural benefits, etc. And when an opportunity presented itself, because the CEO of Arthritis Queensland moved on to another role, I said, I'll do both jobs. And in so doing, be able to double down on this collaboration. And whilst we didn't ever use the M word back then, that was always kind of the unspoken thing, is it will create the opportunity through which we can explore a very proactive approach to merging.
That's really interesting, don't you think? I think I'm also kind of at the moment jumping ahead to imagining being a staff member in Queensland and them thinking, oh, is this potentially looking like a takeover when their CEO goes? And in a vacuum, people start to speculate. And like, how did you as CEO manage that fear, I guess, in the staff and culture?
Yeah. So one of the things that was a real eye-opener for me, so I've lived in Sydney since I moved to Australia in the late 90s. And I really didn't know I came from New South Wales until I went to Queensland, and they went, oh, you're from New South Wales.
Oh, you didn't go through state of origin, did you?
Yes.
Oh, and did you wear a blue jersey?
Well, it's small things like that actually I had to be really sensitive to. It was a thing, and I didn't know it would have been a thing.
And who won that year? Was it New South Wales? That probably salt in the wound.
Thankfully, Queensland won, I think, first year, and so I was very happy to share appropriate photos of Queensland looking very happy. That was quite an eye-opener to me. But as soon as I recognised that, I could then adapt my leadership style. So that looked like I was in person in the Brisbane office once every fortnight. It meant I spent as much time with Brisbane-based staff as I did with New South Wales-based staff. I actively looked for collaborative opportunities between the two teams, so there was never any them and us, with the Brisbane-based team and the Sydney-based team. And so it took quite a lot of kind of sensitive leadership in order to make sure there was no fear. And we had the blessed position of being a merger to grow rather than a merger to survive. So one of our key messages, we don't have to lose any staff through this process. We absolutely want to be getting a more efficient business operation, so that might involve some of our administrative function moving to other roles, but we didn't have to shrink the team. And so staff felt very comfortable on that basis. And when they got to know people from the other organisation, there was no them and us, and it was more of, okay, we're all pulling together in the same direction. So that actually ended up being quite straightforward. That's
good, but it does sound like almost like you actually had to go in and be quite conscious about your language, informing staff about, you know, what is the goal here? It's not let's get rid of 50% of headcount. It's actually we are going to collaborate more and more, and there's a role for everyone. So that's quite a conscious decision on your behalf in terms of how you interact with staff.
Yes, language plays a big role here. The language we used to talk about the relationship was very much a collaboration for the first couple of years. And we only use the M word when we felt comfortable. That's where we're headed and there are no pitfalls that are going to trip us up. I had to model and then manage the right use of language in my team. So as soon as, for example, a manager talked about our office or their office or the other, I had to jump on that pretty quickly. And it wasn't difficult. And, by modeling the right sort of language, and instead of it's the Queensland team, it's our team that are based in Brisbane, those small things made quite a difference because it just made sure there was no them and us between the two teams.
Obviously, both boards and the staff and potentially your partners and other stakeholders were aware of the intention of merging, which is different to the way I've seen that play out for other organisations where that all gets done behind closed doors because due diligence is a very secret process. And until there's actually agreement and sign off by boards, and then the communication starts from there. So was there an advantage being able to do it the way that you did, where you could almost iterate, couldn't you? You were iterating into a merge, so it would have, by the time it happened, it would have felt quite natural.
It allowed us to remove the risk. And again, I feel we were blessed to go through a merger in this way, but it removed the risk because we were able to test a collaboration for a couple of years and layer on benefit after benefit. And those benefits might be cost saving, shared staff, greater level of expertise. Certainly we saw it in terms of number of people with arthritis that we were able to help. That was probably the biggest benefit through program rollout, etc. What it did, it built a completely watertight business case that we just should keep going and then ultimately move from collaboration to merger. So at no point did it feel like a massive risk. It was just done step by step by step. I agree that if the merger had been agreed behind closed doors and then dropped upon a management team or a staff, that would be a very different situation. Not necessarily one that will fail, but will take some different management skills for the CEO.
That's right. And I've seen organisations where they've done the communication all the way through while they're doing the due diligence, and then they've actually rolled back. So the due diligence hasn't given the outcome that one or both of the organisations have been seeking, and so they've then had to turn around and roll all that comms back. And that's obviously then a different kind of management style as well. So I think it just shows there's more than one path to the end.
And I've also seen examples where logic suggests this merger should happen and clients will benefit and organizations will be stronger as a result. And then one of the key stakeholders is not able to look beyond their own self-interest towards the end of the process. And that can one person can derail the whole thing. So,
yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think one of the interesting things is also here is you were two states in a federated structure. And, there's been a lot of federated associations who have successfully joined either one or more states or all states into a national entity. But there's also been a lot that have failed. Even if we don't say failed, because that could be quite emotive, even if we say chose not to go ahead, there's so many reasons why it could happen. But then, as you say, there's a lot of seemingly nonsensical reasons, which are apparently very sensible to one or more people, that it doesn't happen. Because I remember talking with a federated association, and people say, well, obviously if we were going to set up an association now, we'd never set up 7 different associations that all work together. We'd just set up one national body. But because historically we were set up as states, it's then about, well, could we do more? Could we create more impact? Would it be better for our beneficiaries? Is our whole purpose going to be amplified if we weren't 7 different entities and we were just one, or maybe more than one? Like, it's, as you say, it can be quite a tricky subject, especially if, you've had, like, for example, your New South Wales entity and all your other states have been around for a long time. If you've got lots of assets, like that's really tricky. But actually what I was thinking, given that you're a federated model, did you have, for example, 2 boards that you had to then work with and ensure that, there was a decision making about, okay, so what's the final board look like? I mean, that would have been quite interesting as the CEO. You've got to manage, there's a lot of people to manage in that process.
Yeah, I won't deny it. That was probably the hardest part for me, was supporting, because a CEO doesn't manage boards, but you support 2 boards who have lots of strong personalities around the 2 different tables, who meet with a different cadence, who have different ways of operating. So you really have to be flexible to work with those two different groups at different speeds in different ways, take one hat off, put the other one on, and at times be really conscious about how you present, given you don't want to have an inherent conflict of interest as the CEO of two organizations when the interests of the two boards may not be perfectly aligned. And thankfully, they were largely aligned, and any gaps we were able to overcome pretty quickly. But yeah, that was really challenging. And also what it looked like to me is I worked harder, more evenings through 2024 than I have done before, because I had so many boards and committee meetings in those evenings, even on a business as usual case. But then you had to layer in working groups around the merger as well. That was a lot of evenings. But I also knew it wasn't going to be permanent. This would either be done within the space of 12 months successfully, or we would have walked away and gone, okay, it's just too hard, I can't make it work. And thankfully it was the former, not the latter.
How long did that negotiation process then take? Because you're talking about, you had two board meetings, you had multiple committee meetings, and then obviously working groups. And my CEO brain just went, oh my goodness, that's a full-time job. How long were you in that space for?
Yeah, I served as the CEO of Arthritis Queensland and Arthritis New South Wales for about just over 2 years, but I'd say 2.5 years. I was having to run at two speeds and with two different boards throughout that period of time. The real complexity there and challenge lay throughout 2024. So that was when we also then were actively working on the merger. So not only were there two boards, two sets of committees, there was also this third entity, which is the cross-organisation working group. I mean, I've always banned the word busy at work, but I do talk about capacity, and I was certainly working beyond 100% capacity for that year. But again, I knew it was not going to be permanent. And so I recognized I could sprint harder for the period of time required in order to get this across the line.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to know, because a merger is its own big project in itself. And so the CEO really needs to have a process around how much capacity they have, their self-care through that as well, because there's also a lot of uncertainty in that period as well, because you don't know if it's going to come off, or if it does, when, and what are the conditions and what's changed through the negotiation. You really need that energy.
And what about your staff? Some of them must have been working crazy as well.
Well, as a CEO, if more of your energy is spent supporting boards and working groups and committees, etc., and less is spent working with your management team and the rest of the organization. And I was confident we had and still have a great management team. So if I was less involved in raising money, managing key relationships, ensuring service provision was standard expected, etc., I was pretty confident that none of that stuff was going to fall over. I might not have been able to add as much extra value as normally did, but this couldn't have been done unless I had confidence in a management team that they not just keep the wheels spinning or the plates spinning, but actually keep doing great work, even if I wasn't sat alongside them as much as I normally would like to be.
I think that's something really to know, isn't it? Like if you're a CEO and you're walking into a discussion around merger, or you're presented with a discussion around merger, or even enhanced collaboration, checking that your executive team is really up to, if needed, managing by themselves for a while, right? Because you're so busy.
Measuring the engagement, the sentiment of staff is something that I think a CEO needs to do all the time, constantly, not just with an annual engagement survey, but we have a really cool tool that every week measures the pulse of the organization using AI. It's awesome.
How many questions do you ask?
7 questions asked every week.
7 questions every week. Yep. What are 2 of them? 4
of the questions are the same every week. 3 of them change. The questions are, what is your successes that week? Which of your colleagues need to be recognised for doing great work? What are some of the challenges? And what do you want to talk about in your next one-on-one? And then the other 3 go through a rotation. But what that does, the AI tool then allows us to measure sentiment engagement. And so through this process, I had to report up staff engagement, both at management level, but across the whole organisation, to make sure that the fact that I was focusing so much of my time on merger and the staff were preparing for a fairly significant change didn't drop our engagement scores, and we did very well in that regard.
Oh, that's good. I love a pulse survey. It's always, in fact, we did a podcast on surveys because, no one loves a survey, right? But if they're short and the results are used, then I think, you're normally fine. But yeah, just short and sweet is so good for staff, finding out about staff engagement.
I have a real issue with annual surveys, though. I think that's too long between drinks, and it feels like organisations have to gear up and brace themselves for this survey. And here we go. And then we've got to deal with the results. Whereas if you find a way of doing it on a regular basis, you get lead indicators of future issues, and you can take the constant pulse. And there are many commercially available tools now to do this. And I would encourage all CEOs to move away from the annual survey, I think.
So did you do this pulse survey of both entities as you went through the merger?
Yeah, we did roll out the same tool across both organisations. Yeah, so we had comparative data.
Did you have the same branding at the time?
Yes, we did. So the arthritis organisations share this sort of weird blue A logo. But until we started this process and we compared the two logos, we didn't realise there were different blues, and the font we used in the New South Wales or Queensland thing was actually different. I thought, well, okay. And then we looked around the rest of the country and they all had different variations. Anyway, that aside, yes, we did use this through the collaboration. Our two organisational brands were pretty consistent, but through the merger, we wanted to use that as the catalyst to have a more contemporary brand, and most importantly, which was focused on the impact we want to deliver for clients. So Arthritis New South Wales and Arthritis Queensland, pretty classic institutional names, right? This is the condition that we address. This is the area in which we do it. Doesn't speak to anything about our clients. So the merger did provide an opportunity to look at branding, and we, through a pretty deep consultative process, we ended up with the Arthritis Movement, which has that dual meaning of an organisation that's prompting change, but also getting clients moving is the number one thing that we want to do when people have joint issues. We want to keep them moving in an appropriate way. So we think we came up with a really smart brand.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's really clever. So, I mean, it sounds great. It sounds like you managed it well. Everything went fabulous. So you're telling me nothing would be done differently if you had a chance to do it again?
No, absolutely. I'd do things differently. The process was, we had the luxury of going slowly because it wasn't one from position of financial urgency. In hindsight, it was too slow. It's not like we ever risked losing momentum, but 18 months of talking about who would sit in which chair and what our vision and mission statement might be is a long time. So I wish we'd been able to condense that down to 6 months or less. The second is going into that New South Wales Queensland rivalry a bit more informed. So, well, it was never an issue, but I wish I'd known that before that bloody Sydney side again into the Brisbane office. And the last thing was that it went wrong, that if I had time, I'd do it again. In terms of stakeholder engagement, we could have gone wider, deeper and earlier than we did. We didn't do it badly, but we could have done it better. And certainly for any CEOs going through this process, I'd encourage them to, however much you're communicating, to aim to double that. Get your key messages right, communicate more frequently in a greater variety of ways and with a great level of personalization, because the worst thing is people having conversations separately in isolation that don't reflect the reality of what you're doing.
On that then, because you spoke earlier about how, you're working evenings, you obviously had an enormous workload. So the idea of communicating wider, deeper, more, what would you have dropped in order to be able to give you capacity to do that?
Well, that's a good question. I could probably have delegated even more to a very capable management team. I think as CEOs, we like to think we're more important than we are. And if you can liberate your team and give them responsibility and freedom, that can be so empowering. And that happened, honestly, but I could have done that more.
It helps build trust. It helps build that independence. Yeah.
The second would be to condense the period of time that we were running. You can get up to a full sprint, but you can't keep a full sprint going for a marathon, right? So to be able to condense that, probably 18 months worth of actively working on the merger down to 6 months would have, I think, been a pretty smart move.
From a CEO perspective then, those discussions with the board around timeline, it's really something to have in the forefront of your mind, which is if they're saying, oh, let's process this over a year, then it's almost to think, well, what am I doing as the CEO over a year? Because as you said, if you're reporting to two boards, or even if there's another CEO, you're going to have to work collaboratively with them and be cognizant of their board meetings and you're cognizant of your board meetings and staff. And that's a long time, even if there is another CEO in the mix. And it may even make it harder if there's another CEO in the mix, right? Because you've then got also the whole factor of who is going to be the CEO at the end of the period if one of them isn't already thinking about leaving. So, yeah, I think that timeline, making sure you've got your really good exec team and delegating, as you've said, but those clear communications about what actually you're going to be doing through that period to ensure that, you don't burn out, right?
Yeah. There's a thing that in reflection is front of mind, and that's about the opportunity to be brave through this process. Brave enough to have a conversation about a potential merger, brave enough to look beyond your own self-interests, brave enough to look beyond your organisation's paradigm, brave enough to say, rather than take a year or more to go cautiously, you're not going to do anything foolhardy and make huge decisions on the fly, but also can we be brave enough to create some momentum and push things through. I think a merger is a great opportunity for leaders to model bravery, which when you're grappling with complex challenges like we all are, is something that I think is very valuable.
I actually think that's a really great way to end it, because I think it's a really important message around leadership and CEOs is that courage that is beyond yourself. We inhabit a seat. We're not the organisation when we're CEOs. Thank you.
Thanks so much.